of the ACCE webinar series. This one is hosted by Digital Learning Teaching Victoria, also known as DLTV, your computer education group for Victoria. Our first one, of course, was about a month and a half ago, was hosted by Tasmania. Our next one coming up, which I can talk a little bit more at the end about, is again hosted by Digital Learning and Teaching Victoria. It should be at some time during November. So in the spirit of reconciliation, ACCE acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. For those that are unaware, ACCE is sort of an umbrella body. So each state has their own computer education group. There's ECWA in WA, Intiact in ACT, ICTENSW in New South Wales, EdTech SA South Australia, DLTV Victoria, TasSite Tasmania and QSite in Queensland. There is no computer education group currently in Northern Territory, but there has been one in the past. So what ACCE is they're sort of the umbrella body that helps support each state, and the states are all members of ACCE, as most of the people in attendance here tonight are members of each state. So part of the things that we provide for our states, we've decided to run this webinar series where the board members, myself included, support each state to run a couple of webinars over the next 18 months or so that are provided free to each state member. And if you're not a member, then it's a small fee. But look, if there's any non-members here, I highly recommend joining your state computer education group, whichever one it may be. They're great value for money, and you do get an awful lot out of them. Before moving on, I probably should introduce myself. I'm the president of ACCE. I'm also the secretary of DLTV, Digital Learning Teaching Victoria. My name's Ben Gallagher. I've worked closely with one of our presenters today, Matt, for a number of years. We went to the same primary school.
We did.
A long time ago. Just for the record, because it's always nice to remember, I am in the top 3 favourite students of Matt's mum, and Matt does not rate in those top 3. So it's nice to have something over him there.
I'm not in the top 20, Ben.
I'm sure you are. So tonight we've got Dr. Matthew Harrison and Jess Rowlings with us to present on Press B to Belong. For those who are not familiar with Matt and Jess, they've worked together for a number of years through Melbourne Uni. And did you want to just have a quick talk about your next gen group that you've started, just to give everyone just a quick outline of it?
Yeah, so Matt and I have also got a couple of slides introducing ourselves and how we got here, but we're co-founders of Next Level Collaboration, and we're a social enterprise that runs cooperative gaming-based programs to help neurodivergent kids like those who are autistic or have ADHD build on their collaborative teamwork skills and build social connections as well by playing cooperative video games together. We also recruit and hire neurodivergent adults, who are also gamers, to help run our sessions and have some role models for the kids that come to our programs too.
Thanks, Jess. So just before I hand over to Matt and Jess, just a quick reminder, I know we're pretty old-handed to online meetings now, but if you could just keep your microphone on mute, I'm sure there's plenty of people like myself that will be eating some dinner while we're going through the webinar and listening today. And I've got a real thing about eating sounds. I really don't like it. So just a reminder to keep those things on mute. You can use the chat to pop a few questions in. We'll have 15 minutes at the end for questions where you can ask Matt and Jess anything that you've got to say. So if you need a reminder, you can pop it in the chat for it there. The session's also being recorded, so just be mindful of that. Anything that pops up in the chat will be transcribed. So don't tell Matt how great looking he is or ask him out on dates or anything like that. His cats are very jealous. So, yes. And they're not here. This is the first meeting in a long time I've had with Matt where we're not going to have Einstein walk across the computer screen.
No, we thought we were a professional outfit, Ben. We don't want a cat, crashing your Zoom.
Absolutely. So, enjoy the next 45 minutes. of Matt and Jess, and I know that you will, having seen them speak a number of times, and well, I haven't read Matt's second book. I have read his first book. Very, very insightful. You'll get a lot of information out of it. And I'll stop sharing my screen now so that they can take over.
Yeah, fantastic. Can I just check, Ben, you can see our screen now?
I absolutely can. I love that graphic.
Yeah, fantastic. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us tonight. It's so excited to be here with ACCE. As someone who is a proud member of DLTV, it's just really nice to see our national community together. My name is Dr. Matthew Harrison. I'd like to just begin by acknowledging traditional owners and custodians of Australia and just pay my respects as well to elders past and present, just acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Just to give you an overview of tonight, we're going to briefly introduce ourselves, and then we're going to talk about why eSports is an important space for creating inclusive school communities. It's exciting to see some people on the call here who I know are doing wonderful things in eSports, so it'd be great to hear their experiences, your experiences at the end of eSports. We're going to talk a little bit about neurodiversity and why that matters to us, and I'm sure it matters to everyone here. We're going to talk about some of the strategies and supports for neurodivergent and gender-inclusive eSports communities, because they're the two areas we get asked a lot about. Then we're going to introduce something called the Everyone Can Play Inclusive eSports Framework, and this is really exciting. This is a framework that we think, we're a bit biased, is well leading, and it's developed by Australian teachers in collaboration with Australian teachers to remove barriers for many different historically marginalised groups to be able to participate in eSports, both social and competitive. Then we're going to talk about next level collaboration, which Ben touched on, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So yes, hello, I'm Matt. I'm a teacher. I've worked right from foundation to year 12. I've worked in Australia, the UK and South Korea. I'm currently a senior lecturer in learning intervention, and that means we support students with labels of disability or neurodivergence and support schools in removing barriers for these students. My areas of real passion and interest are the intersection between neurodiversity, digital technologies, and inclusive education. And my research is really about how we can use digital technologies to better support neurodivergent students and to create a more inclusive education system. I'm also the co-leader of the University of Melbourne Neurodiversity Project. I'm neurodivergent myself. I have ADHD, and that informs a lot of my thinking around here. I'll pass you over to Jess now.
Looks like I'm rich.
Yes.
It's not as big as it looks. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jess. I'm a speech pathologist by trade. I work with a lot of kids in those late primary school to early high school years who tend to be a bit of the missing middle in terms of speech pathology support. I'm now a researcher at the Faculty of Education with Matt, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Next Level Collaboration. I've done a lot of work around what we call pragmatic or the practical use of language, particularly working with neurodivergent kids, which has been really exciting. But this is really what I specialise in now at Next Level Collaboration, using cooperative games as a tool to help develop these skills. As a researcher, I focus on, again, that digital games-based learning, particularly for inclusion as well within schools, which we'll talk a bit about today. And I'm very interested in how we support neurodivergent girls and women who historically have been underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed or just not had any access to support at all. I've also started my PhD, so I'm looking at how we can create inclusive experiences for neurodivergent adult women in gaming communities. Again, there's a big gap here in the research is neurodivergent women don't exist in gaming research. And there's also quite a lot that focuses on children, but we know that gaming does actually, have a lot of benefits through the lifespan. So I am trying to target, again, another group that have been historically overlooked here. I'm neurodivergent myself. So I was diagnosed with autism when I was 19 and then ADHD when I was 22. I always knew that I was different. School was really, really hard a lot of the time. I was what they called an academically gifted kid. So it wasn't the academic stuff that was really a challenge. It was actually the social side of things and forming those connections with my peers. So Matt and I probably wouldn't have ended up in the career path that we have if our work wasn't really important to us. And a lot of this reason is because we are both gamers. On the right here, you can also see Dan, who we do some work with, and Dan runs the Fuse Cup eSports programs up in Queensland and Asia Pacific. We wrote a book with Dan as well, which is really exciting, but we'll show you that at the end. Particularly for me, gaming was a way to build social connections with my sister, who is very, very different to me, and we didn't have a lot of common interests except the PlayStation 2, but also with my peers at school. And it's really interesting looking back because, I found it quite hard to make friends, but having a mutual interest in gaming with other kids in my class gave me opportunities for social connections that I otherwise wouldn't have had. In reality, these interactions, didn't ever lead to sort of any ongoing friendship, but it meant that I could have a conversation with, somebody sitting on my table around a game that they were playing and were stuck on, or they had finished a game that I really liked and to get advice from them. So it's really that point of mutual interest that can provide that platform, I guess, for building those social connections, but also in what we do at Next Level Collaboration, building other skills as well. And Matt, I know this was something similar for you.
It is, and it's wonderful having Ben on the call, because Ben, I hope you appreciate the Commander Keen reference here. Growing up, I'm a bit older than Jess. The grey hairs kind of give it away. Growing up, I'm playing on an old 286 computer and having, at school or at home, having, groups of kids around the keyboard. And as a teacher, when I was thinking about how did I develop those teamwork skills, those collaboration skills, those skills like taking turns, asking for feedback, how to recognise when to offer help and when not to. Some of it was through sport, but a lot of it was through gaming and playing games with friends. And that really informed a lot of my research here as well.
So to start off with, we will have a look at the concept of eSports. I'm sure most of you will be fairly familiar with eSports, but it's a really interesting area that has gotten very big very quickly. So back when I was I would have been late high school, and there was this thing called the International, which was a Dota 2 competition. And I went, wow, you can make millions of dollars by being really, really good at Dota 2. I never got there. I'm awful at the game. But that was really around probably 2013 when eSports started getting really big and recognized as a valid, competitive activity in the same way that we recognize, NBA or NFL or AFL. There's a few different definitions or ideas around what eSports is, but we use this definition here from the eSports Federation, which describes eSports as a competitive sport where gamers use their physical and mental ability to compete in various games in a virtual electronic environment. We really like this definition because it's nice and broad. Not all eSports are the same. We've moved on from the days of Counter-Strike and Dota 2 to even competitive Microsoft Excel. So which is fantastic. The kids who play it are so good. But it has become something that really is for everyone, that you don't have to be, a really excellent, carry in Dota 2 to be able to play in these competitive events.
Don't interrupt, but no. Jess and I met the Australian Excel champion is in high school.
Unreal. It was so good.
It's competitive Microsoft Excel, which is fantastic.
Yeah. This is really fun fact to us. Esports is something that can be really flexible to support a range of different needs when we're creating inclusive environments for school, which is what DAM is really good at with Fuse Cup. So everything we're going to cover today is really around promoting two really important things for particularly our neurodivergent and gender diverse students: inclusion and a sense of belonging. When we talk about belonging in the different ways we can conceptualize or define this, but Matt and I really like this definition from the OECD because it focuses on trust, acceptance, love, and support. And I think regardless of whatever demographic you belong to, however your brain works, what your physical abilities are, these are all things that help us feel like we belong as humans, and belonging and connection is a human need. So I'm sure as educators, teachers, the term inclusion, you will have heard it. It gets thrown around all the time. If I don't know if it, every time I heard this speech, you'd have at least one yacht. But Matt and I really wanted to look at what does it actually mean for something to be inclusive. And we looked at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities because this was really helpful for us to understand the different levels of inclusion and what are the things that need to happen for something to be considered truly inclusive. We had Mel, who also did our cover illustration. She's a brilliant illustrator. We had her put together these diagrams showing the different levels of inclusion. If any of you are Nintendo nerds, you might notice that these are the Audi version of Pikmin because we didn't want a Nintendo lawsuit, but we thought these were a really good way of kind of having a visual representation of what these levels mean. So if you look at the integration diagram, you can see that there's those coloured Pikmin. They're inside that big circle, but there's still this inner fence that's separating them from the other yellow Pikmin. They're technically included, but there's still a barrier around their ability to participate in the same way that the other yellow Pikmin are. If you then look at the inclusion diagram, that removes the inner fence around those coloured pigmen. So all those pigmen are in the same big circle. They've all got the same access to the same level of opportunity. And this is really important because when Matt and I looked at all this, we found that these biggest differences for a truly inclusive program was that these programs remove barriers, which we've represented by that inner fence, and support individual differences so that everybody does have an equal opportunity to participate regardless of what their needs are. And they also promote a sense of belonging. It's a bit like if you've been in the general admission section at a concert and they've got the little fence at the front for the people who paid more for the ticket. You're not really included. There's still a barrier for you to get the front row seat. So as part of our research, we also looked at these 6 keys to inclusion, and we'll go through these as part of the Everyone Can Play eSports framework later. But what we really focus on here are these 6 really important factors that as educators, as researchers, that we can look at to kind of assess how we're going in terms of the inclusivity of our programs. There's different levels. So being at level 1 doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. We all have, considerations and constraints around what we can do, but these are more designed as things that we can look at to help assess where we're at and what things that we might be able to do to improve the programs that we're running, which I'm sure are already absolutely brilliant. We also, because Matt and I work in inclusion, we do specifically focus on supporting students from what we call historically marginalised backgrounds. But today we're going to focus on female and non-binary players and neurodivergent players. Because we get asked about these a lot. If you look at the history of gaming, it hasn't always been particularly inclusive towards anyone who's not male. But we also know that there's a lot of neurodivergent kids that we work with are really passionate about gaming, and we want them to be able to participate in that. So to start, we'll have a quick look at the concept of neurodiversity. So the neurodiversity movement is really around positioning neurological differences, variations in how our neurology works as part of the natural human variation between us all, but also as part of our identity. In the same way that, we have different body shapes, hair colours, skin colours and heights, our brains also work in different ways too. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that we're all different. And the really important thing about the neurodiversity framework is that it's not trying to focus on fixing or trying to cure these differences, but instead, like we saw in that pigment diagram, removing barriers to promote equal opportunities for people, regardless of how their neurology works. Someone to get asked, is it neurodiverse? Is it neurodivergent? The best way I've found to explain it is that everybody's neurodiverse, but one person can be neurodivergent. Because neurodivergence refers to someone whose neurology falls outside what we consider the typical norms. It can be associated with a formal diagnostic label. So autism and ADHD are really commonly associated with being neurodivergent, but there's also things like dyslexia, epilepsy, Tourette's syndrome, and some people with, complex trauma or like psychosis also identify as neurodivergent. Being neurotypical just means that you are somebody whose neurology falls within what we consider those typical norms. A quote I hear really often and I like is that if you have met one person with autism, you have met one person with autism. We diagnose autism using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's not a particularly neurodiversity affirming term, mental disorders, but it's the tool that we use. That diagnostic instrument has sort of a few, criteria that they look for when making a diagnosis, but in reality, these present very, very differently between humans. My sister and I are both autistic, and we are, like, no pun intended, but very opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how we present. So some autistic people, have quite a high IQ. These are the kids that tend to fall through the cracks, because their academic achievement, like for me, can mask their other difficulties. Some people have an average IQ. There are other people that have a co-occurring intellectual disability, but there is no correlation between your intelligence or IQ and whether you're autistic. They're very separate factors. Speech and language and communication can vary. We have kids at next level collaboration who are very chatty. They will give you the most immaculate description of their favourite video games. We have other kids who will prefer to communicate non-verbally, so they might draw or write or use gesture. There's a lot of variance in motor skills as well. There can be a stereotype that autistic people are not good at sports or are uncoordinated. I am one of those people, but I also know autistic people who are really, really good at sports. Sensory profiles vary too. So there are some people that are what we call sensory seeking. So these might be the kids that are using fidgets or moving in their chairs, or if you work in a primary school, like swinging on the swings as high as they can go. And we've also got people who are sensory avoidant, so they, might prefer quieter, calmer, darker spaces. Or if they're using fidgets, things like, beads on a string that are just a bit more gentle when they feel them. Some people do show exceptional abilities, particularly in schools. We call this a spiky profile. So they might have some areas that are really, really high on an assessment, then other areas that are not so much. Again, these areas of really high achievement can compensate for areas where they might need support, and sometimes these kids don't get picked up. Individual needs do fluctuate day to day. They might have had a really bad night's sleep. Fire drills can be really stressful for autistic students. You've got a loud fire alarm, trying to move people out of the class, a disruption to their routine. So if you've had that at 11 a.m. in the morning, you might have a student who at 2 o'clock is just absolutely exhausted. And we're not genies, we can't fix everything. And that's just, you really have to work with what you've got in those situations. Masking is something that's got a lot of attention probably in the last 10 years. When we talk about masking, this is really a process where autistic people modify their natural, and we're going to emphasize natural there, social behaviours to essentially, adapt and fit in with the neurotypical world. Masking is a lot of the reason girls and women don't get picked up. Some of them are really, really good maskers and they just come off as anxious, or they're what I was, the dream student during the day, and then go home and just melt down the second you get home because it's taken all their energy just to manage the environment, that you've been in for 6 hours. It's really sad, but masking has been linked to some pretty poor outcomes for autistic people in particular. So things like exhaustion and eventually just hitting total burnout. There's correlations between depression and anxiety. And for some people as well, there's actually a loss of identity, that they have maintained this mask for so long that they don't really feel like they or other people know who they are, which is really sad. As a speech pathologist, and if you have students who have, I think they're called IEP plans now, yes, you might see goals listed around social skills. But social skills is a very broad term. Not all social skills are the same because we actually have two main types. And these are our normalising or cultural social skills, and then our functional or collaborative social skills. The difference here is that our normalising or cultural skills are really quite significantly influenced by the social and cultural context in which they occur. So eye contact is like the textbook example of a cultural skill. In Western cultures, the norms that we make direct eye contact during conversation, that's the social norm. In other cultures, and particularly in a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, the social norm is not to make direct eye contact during conversation. That's actually considered disrespectful to look them directly in the eye. So the thing is here, when we're looking at these normalising skills, it's really hard to know what is the correct use of this skill because it's actually very, very different depending on the context around it. Same as public transport. When Matt and I were in Korea, you don't talk on the train. I loved it. It's, a whole thing that you need to be considerate and respectful of other people. But in Melbourne, people will take phone calls on the train, they'll play videos, and people won't get outwardly upset with that. But it just means that, these skills really vary on what's going on around them. And it's very, very influential when we're trying to teach, well, how do we use this skill? Functional or collaborative skills are a lot more purposeful, and these are skills that can be shown in a lot of different ways while still achieving the same functional outcome or purpose. Taking turns is a really good example of this. So at next level, we will have kids who verbally ask, would you like to have a turn? We might have them just pass the controller across. We have some kids as well. So if you've ever played Mario games, multiplayer, and you hit a question block and it pops up with 4 power-ups for 4 players. We have kids who will go across, wait to the side, wait until all the other players have picked up a power-up, and then they will go in and take what's left. So those students are all showing the skill in very different ways, and they're ways that work best for who they are and their needs, but that same functional purpose is still being achieved. They're still taking turns with each other. These are some other examples of functional or collaborative skills. Quiet voices is a really interesting one. When I first started my speech pathology studies, I was always under the impression that a quiet voice it's a really quiet voice. You might not be able to hear it in a loud space. When we teach this skill, we talk about a quiet voice as a voice that just means you can be heard in a room, but also other people can be heard in a room. So if you're playing eSports, it's exciting, it's fun, the noise levels will naturally increase, but you still can't be yelling over the top of everyone else. You just might need to use a bit louder voice so that other people can hear when you're talking. But also we need to make sure it's a volume that if your teammate's sitting next to you, if Matt wants me to do something, that I can hear when he tells me what to do. Again, it really depends on what's happening around them, but the functional purpose is that we're just talking at a volume that means we and other people can be heard. So through this next session, we're going to have a look at different strategies for supporting neurodivergent and our female and non-binary gamers in eSports. Because I think eSports has been something that's been quite revolutionary for their inclusion at school. So one thing that I really love about video games is that these actually offer a range of communication options. If we're looking at the idea of neurodiversity and people's brains work in different ways, they communicate in different ways. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with Minecraft. Minecraft has options for text chat. You can use voice chat. You can use emotes where their avatar, waves or sits down or communicates using gesture. And this is great because it does give players to engage on their own terms in a way that feels most comfortable for them using their preferred communication style. We've even had things where we have a simultaneous Zoom running at the same time so they can have a video call. And again, you don't have to have your video on, but you might want to use the voice. You might want to have a separate conversation in the Zoom text chat. The other good thing about games is they have very clear game mechanics and boundaries. So there's really, clear expectations for our players as to what they can or cannot do. A lot of neurodivergent players, particularly autistic people, really like structured settings with clear expectations with no ambiguity. So having something like a game where there are very strict, rigid boundaries about what the game will and won't allow you to do is a really good foundation to build off because you're already in a structured environment. It's really bad, and it's sad that I saw this growing up, but diagnostic labels associated with a lot of neurodivergent identities have historically been used as part of trash talk, particularly in public online or gaming spaces like Halo back in the day. I've seen people getting called autistic as a slur, and that's really not okay. It's not appropriate. But it's something as that we might have players who have historically felt excluded from these spaces because their identities have been weaponized against them. So part of our work as well, and particularly in part of our book, is looking at ways that we can, manage these things. We've had kids come in and repeat something that they've heard online and not really understand why that's inappropriate. So part of our role too is to make sure that everybody in our esports community's conduct, is a way that makes everyone feel safe and supported, and that if there's inappropriate behaviour occurring, that we understand why and explain why that's not okay. We really I call it communication partner training as a speechy. But what this really is teaching people to work with other people's communication preferences. So I do a lot of work with our Girls Plus group. We have one girl who she tends to communicate non-verbally. She will draw and write her diagrams. So part of my work has been actually teaching the other girls in that group to understand her communication preferences and work with her that maybe they might need to adjust their communication to better support her needs. And this is, part of the value of these video games having, flexibility around how we communicate too, that this makes it easier to learn how to communicate with other people in different ways. That's kind of inherently built into the game world. But it's really important, that if we can all learn to effectively communicate with each other, it makes it so much easier to play as a team. Some of our neurodivergent players can be really anxious around giving feedback. They might be really worried if they cannot stand a game. They might not feel comfortable to tell us that. We have a very please tell us if you think this game sucks. We are not going to make you play it. We have a no hostage policy, but some of our kids do need support to, embrace their own autonomy and tell us if a game's not working for them or if they don't like it. So that's really important too, is just giving them space and making sure that they feel empowered to come and tell you if something's not working. We have a few games that are just a no-go for several of our groups because we've had feedback going, this is not for us, and that's great. We want them to tell us. We want them to advocate for themselves. For a lot of our gender diverse and female and non-binary players, one of the biggest things they found, you sort of say, oh, this is an example of a woman in gaming, or, we can embrace more women in gaming. But one of the biggest things that was the most effective was actually just having them there, having women, up on an esports stage and just defying those stereotypes that are associated with gaming, gives younger girls the opportunity to look at that and go, oh, I could grow up to be her. I grew up sort of watching Good Game on ABC, and Hex from Good Game was the first woman I ever saw in a, position of leadership or professionalism in the video games industry. And that was when I went, oh, this could be a job for me one day. So that's so important, is seeing those role models and seeing, as Matt always says, if you can see it, you can be it. Again, sort of similar to before, women unfortunately do experience disproportionately harassment in online spaces, particularly if it's easy for other players to identify their gender. And there's not always a lot of representation of women in esports and professional gaming events too. So there is more work coming out around having, esports events that are designed for women, which is great. But then sometimes there's also some arguments here. Well, is this truly inclusive, or are they still being othered, kind of competing in their own league, rather than, if we look back to that Pikmin diagram, being fully integrated with the broader esports scene? There we go. We spoke to a teacher in Queensland who was doing some really brilliant work with her girls as part of the Fuse Cup and as part of esports. And one thing that I really stuck with me was she said giving her female identifying students the option to play in either mixed gender or girls only esports programs, because there were some girls who did want to go and play with everyone. Some of them didn't feel quite comfortable with that and preferred to stay in the girls' leagues. But the biggest thing there was that they had the choice. They could choose where they felt comfortable to play. And there were some that started out playing in the girls' competitions and then felt confident enough to go and join the mixed gender ones. But the whole culture around their practice for competitive play too was having that safe space just for them. They had a room where they weren't kids walking past couldn't look in, which can be really anxiety inducing. But there was this really nice culture of girls supporting girls. And if they lost, if there was one, I think she saw someone else from another team lose in an event and then just went up and gave her a hug and supported her, which was just beautiful. For accessibility as well, just giving them games and hardware choices and also activity options that kind of cater to their needs. It's really interesting. There were some girls at this teacher's school who really wanted to, get into the really competitive games. They wanted to play Rocket League. There were others who actually preferred to do things like design challenges, or they had even an Animal Crossing design challenge where they all collaboratively worked on an island and then display bits around the school in the same way you do an art project. And I thought that was just such a good example of making something that works for everyone. The competitive side can be really overwhelming, but for some of the girls, creativity and design feels a lot more approachable. And Matt, I'm going to hand over to you to talk through the Everyone Can Play framework.
Thank you, Jess. So we just to take a step back and give you some context. Jess and I worked with Dan to identify schools that were leaders in esports across Australia that were really interested in supporting different populations of students. And we thought, when we looked at these schools, what we wanted to understand was what were they doing that allowed them to be so successful with groups of students who had historically been pushed down. That's what Jess was saying earlier. And so when we were trying to think about, we've got all this wonderful advice from all these teachers about what they're doing. We wanted to find a framework or a way of representing how we could bring all this advice together and to think about support teachers and people running programs in other schools to really help them to interrogate and think about and reflect on how inclusive were their programs across these different elements. The first thing we looked at was a model from Sweden. And I was looking at inclusion in terms of disability inclusion, but we thought it applied to other categories as well, like socioeconomic status, including students from rural and remote areas, gender inclusion, and supporting students maybe who did have physical access needs as well. And what we liked was it actually came up with this idea of 4 levels of inclusion. This Swedish model gave us a language. It helped us to think about, when we're thinking about inclusion, the first level is participation. And that's the young people we work with actually being allowed to play. And then the next level, level 2, and I like this as a gamer, the idea of levels, is the idea of individualized support adjustments being made so an individual can play. And this might be giving someone an adaptive controller, for example, or this might be giving someone a special PC that helps meet their vision access needs. The third level is the idea of universal support, and that's the idea of planning from the very outset. And you might have heard of universal design for learning. It's a really growing concept growing in popularity now. The idea that planning from the outset so everyone can choose how they play. And so rather than giving one person who may have physical access needs a special controller, it's having a range of different controls available for everyone. And so people can choose the controller that works best for them. And that doesn't single anyone out, saying this controller is just for the student who may have, a disability related to their fine motor skills. This is actually saying, hey, people use different controllers and that's fine. And And the last thing is this idea of community. The top level of inclusion is the idea of community. And this is really when we transfer that ownership of the community over to our students, and that everyone's accepted and celebrated for being who they are. And that's what we aspire to. There's nothing wrong with being at the participation level or the individualized support level, but we want to move towards that community level, because that's when students feel like they really belong within their eSports program. So we mapped these 4 levels against those 6 keys to inclusion that Jess talked about earlier. And what we wanted to do was to be able to give teachers some indicator of where they're at in terms of each of these areas, each of these keys, in terms of which level each of these their program was at for each of those keys, and also what they could do next. That's really important to be able to work towards having an eSports community where everyone was accepted and felt like they belonged. So we developed the Everyone Can Play framework, basing it on this model from Sweden, this original framework from Sweden. We adapted it for eSports, and we used this as a way of bringing together all the wonderful advice we received from these teachers across Australia about what they were doing for these different groups of students to make sure they felt like they belonged within their community. So when you can see here, we've also got the example here of belonging. Belonging can be broken down into formal belonging and informal belonging. Formal belonging really speaks about our students actually being allowed to join a program. So the first step, level 1, is the teacher or the teaching assistant brings a player to an eSports program. So that's them saying, hey, you're welcome. You can actually come in the front door here and you can play with these other students. You can see level 2 is we talk about students with diverse needs. They can actually enroll in the program, but additional support may be required to help them fully participate. So that's the idea of individualizing supports, modifying what you're doing retrospectively so those students can take part. Once you get to level 2 of that, once they're actually got in the front door and actually playing, we can look at those other levels of the informal belonging. So we can see level 3, informal belonging, is all students in eSports program feel welcome as if they're part of the group. And to be able to be part of the group, you first have to be allowed in the front door. So what this framework does is allows our schools to be able to look at what are we doing now and what could we do to get to the next level. And what we're seeing is schools are using this framework not just for teachers to assess, but giving it to their students, the eSports program, the eSports club, and saying, hey, which level do you think we're at for formal belonging? Which level do you think we're at for informal belonging? And that student self-assessment and the idea of having conversations around what does inclusion and belonging look like in our eSports program? And so we hope that framework will be helpful for you. We're not going to be able to, we want to be able to share this with you. So we'll share information about the book at the end of the session. The other thing we get asked about is a lot of our highly structured programs, next level collaboration. As Jess introduced, next level collaboration, as opposed to an eSports program, is a highly structured program that uses teamwork-based games. And we use a 3-stage structure within these programs. So these are programs that are teacher-led, but give students some agency in being able to learn and practice collaborative skills together. So the 3 stages we use within our programs are stage A, that's skill instruction through video modeling, video review. Stage B, which is the most of the time, which is the coach, which is our students playing together and receiving feedback from the teacher on their play. And then we have a guided reflection at the end of every session. So the idea of learning about the skills and the context in which they can be used, practicing the skills, and then reflecting on those skills. And we know from the research evidence, those 3 steps are essential for every student to be able to recognize not just what are these collaborative skills, but how can they be used in our day-to-day lives in a meaningful way. We know they need to practice those skills in a way where that they can regulate their emotional states. So that's a real key part of what we're doing. If you'd like to learn more about what we do with Next Level Collaboration, please reach out to us. We'll have our details at the end here of the session. But we would really encourage you to think about how you can use gaming as a tool to be able to build up that sense of social inclusion and to focus on those universal collaborative skills that we know that everyone needs. Thank you very much. We've got time now, I think, Ben, for questions. I will share resources at the very end as well.
Thanks very much, Jess and Matt. We'll pass over to see if anyone has any questions at the moment, but
we'll get the chat up.
Yeah, I don't think I didn't notice any in the chat. There may be some. Look, I think there's some really great stuff that people will be able to reflect on. I'll just pad for a bit so people can think of questions that they have. Just a couple of the graphics that you use. I love them. If I've got a feeling, Jess, do you draw those?
Oh, no, I'm terrible at drawing. We had Mel Valance, who also works with us at Next Level, but she's also an illustrator. So, yeah, she did all these beautiful
yes, that's very, offhanded, but I just love them. I always have all the stuff that comes up, the presentations that you both do. And, Matt, you've ruined my night. I'm going to have to go and look for Commander Keen emulators once we're finished here. So, every now and then it's one of those games that you forget about, and it gets mentioned, and you go, oh, I remember when I was 8 and I got to school half an hour early with my best mate, so I could jump on the one computer that took 5 minutes to load up and then 10 minutes for the game to load up, and so you get 5 minutes of game time on it. It was just the best.
Monday nights, Ben, was the Pleasant Street Primary School. That's where Ben and I went to primary school.
Yeah.
Staff meeting night. And my mum told me that years later that she felt really guilty about us having to wait around for an hour and a half while they did all their staff meetings, because she used to have to help lead them. And for my brother and I, it was the best time because we had an hour and a half of screen time back in those days, which was like unheard of unlimited Commander Keen in her room on her 286 computer, the one computer in the room.
And some of the games that you had on there were just brilliant. Like they were.
Yes.
I remember Mars as well. Do you remember Mars?
Oh, I remember Mars.
Yeah,
very well.
Duke Nukem and all those.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden Doom came out, and you weren't allowed to play that at school, but you certainly played it at home. The work you've done on the Everyone Can Play framework, I know you gave us a little sneak peek, is just fantastic. Yes. And I think that people are really going to look to jump on and have a look at that. But the big thing that I really loved about what you spoke about was, and it the graphic again that you used made it so clear, was the conceptualization of inclusion. 90% of people that say, yep, they're inclusive, and I'm guilty of it at times too, use that integration model. So, yep, you've got them all in together, but they're still off doing their own thing. And I think that the graphic that you used to describe that really opened my eyes up as to what true inclusion is. I've padded enough. I see a few questions coming up through the chat. So, Jess and Matt, I'll pass back to you so you can have a bit of a look and answer some of those.
I just see a quick question from Janet about the framework, and we can't share it. And unfortunately, that's because of our publisher. We really wanted to share it. We've been told because of the copyright laws, we can share parts of it. I think it was up to 15% or something. There's a limit. But Janet, we'll share.
People also know it's question time if we.
Yes, there's the book if you want to have a look at it. I'll just let you know, Janet, if you come to the Melbourne Uni Library, there's multiple copies here. And if you know someone who's got a Melbourne Uni license, there's an ebook version as well where you can get everything. Yes. Oh. It's in that library. They are very important for us. It's very nice. So, Janet, if you want to shoot me an email, we'll have our email at the end. I might be able to facilitate some help there, or anyone else interested. I know it's unfortunate, the rules of academic publishing, Ben. I'm sorry about that.
I can see here from Yolan, how do schools manage the expectations from students that are not neurodivergent? Because they might find it unfair that neurodivergent students get to use Rubik's Cubes or gaming. This is something that we find these are universal. And when we talk about belonging, the whole, idea is that we're helping our neurodivergent students interact and form connections with our neurotypical students, or, whatever their needs might be. So more than anything, it's just having clear expectations for everyone that, we need to be polite, we need to be respectful, we need to treat our gaming hardware with care and respect. because the whole point is around that social inclusion, and particularly for a lot of our neurodivergent students, it can be quite hard for them to connect with their neurotypical peers because a lot of them go about it in a different way. If you're interested in that, Damien Milton's double empathy problem is a good way of explaining how sometimes neurodivergent and neurotypical people can be speaking a bit of a different language. But we find most of these clubs have been open to students with all different needs, whether they have no additional needs, whether they have, you know, some support needs, or whether they have more complex support needs. And the idea is really around using that mutual interest in gaming as a way for them to connect. And then as educators and as leaders facilitating these sessions, we provide the support so that everyone, you know, has that opportunity to interact and participate, you know, at an equal level. Does that help?
Following on from that, Jess, too, I'm assuming you said you see a lot where all people are included, that would, the gaming and the esports would help connect the neurodivergent, neurotypical kids.
Yeah.
Because then it's providing that platform where they can connect. Whereas if they're out kicking the football or they're running around and it's noisy and loud outside, typically it separates, whereas the gaming, I assume, provides that platform.
Yeah, I know you had the boy who was your Mario Kart expert.
Yeah, so there's a question I think about my other disabilities as well, and Alfina, I had a young man who has Down syndrome, and it was really interesting when we had Mario Kart Club. It was in a school that had a base room where they had students who had a diagnosis or a disability, and it wasn't a full inclusive school, but we used to run to get kids who weren't in that base room into the space and get our young people meeting other kids from across the school. We used to run Mario Kart on Friday lunchtimes, and it was fantastic because we were a young man with Down syndrome who was really, really good, knew all the shortcuts in Mario Kart, and would give me a run for my money. And he was actually teaching other kids some of the shortcuts and come in and showing them. And he became known not as the kid with Down syndrome, but as a kid who's really good at Mario Kart. We overheard, myself and another teacher, overheard some year 5, 6s saying, I'll go and ask this kid about how they, how they did that or how they got to that shortcut. And they were being seen as just another kid, which is what we want. The idea, they're not being seen for their disability label or difference per se. That makes sense. And this kid actually started playing cricket with those year 5, 6s. And I just thought, that's fantastic. That's what we want, is kids to feel like they've got friends and that they're a part of their local school community. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Michelle, I'm providing a range of controllers. What can you do when preparing for an external esports competition and the controller type is set as a certain type? Yeah, that's really tricky because sometimes, there's only so much you have within your power, that you can provide them with everything that they need. And then an external regulator says, you need to use a controller that doesn't work for their needs.
Well, we know a lot of the esports competitions, if it's related to physical access, are really good now, Michelle. And we're talking about the Disability Standards for Education, that they're entitled to an adjustment. And those controllers, well, I've got one in my office, the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. It's just as hard to use in terms of, you still have to actually, play the game. What it does is allows you to use things like buttons and switches. Yeah. So I would talk to the esports competition. Most are really good now and say, hey, this is a Disability Standards for Education need, and it's an access need. And in my experience, most have said, yeah, no worries. If it's about access, absolutely, we will, follow the legislation and allow that student to use adaptive controller.
The reality is a lot of those adaptive controllers are a varied version of the traditional controllers. So Sony's got their access controller, which is basically just a spread out PS5 controller. Yeah. Same buttons, same everything, but it just means you don't have to hold it like this and you can use it like this in terms of your motor skill needs.
What I've seen really cool, Jess, as well, is some programs, I think Dan's on this co-pilot mode, where everyone's using the adaptive controllers. You have multiple people. It's like multiple people steering the one kart in Mario Kart. So you have someone using a big button switch. It's a big button to fire the item or to use the item. Someone else steering the kart, and it's like taking the different components of the controller and giving the different people different roles. So it's the idea you've got one kart, multiple people, and that way you can find a role for everyone within the team based on their physical access needs, if that helps.
We've done that with some kids at next level too, where they've where Matt's done the jump timing and they've just had to move ahead, which is a lot easier for some kids that might find it harder to coordinate or time those jumps.
If you need help with that, Michelle, I'm very happy to have those conversations around Disability Stands for Education about thinking about how we can keep it fun for everyone, but also remove some of those barriers. I'm always happy to provide advice around that to programs.
There's been plenty of questions in the chat. Anyone that would like to verbally speak and ask a question at all? Feel free to unmute and go for it. There was just another question popped up in the chat there, Matt. I'm not sure if you saw it. Matt and Jess, I'm not sure if you're talking, but you might be on mute, or else I might be in a bit of trouble.
Hello, can you hear us okay?
Now we can, yep.
Yeah,
We're back. This is why you have backup devices.
We're planning to head to this one. So I'm going to jump off the Zoom and just be on the laptop now.
There we go.
Okay, here we are. We are back.
Working beautifully. Look at that go.
Oh, look at that. What a smooth transition. Yeah, Jess.
Yeah. So I guess in the least self-promotional way possible, this is what our book is designed to do. And we know that not everyone has a lot of experience with esports or knows where to start. So this is kind of what we've tried to do, is give teachers or people who want to start an esports program with their students essentially a how-to guide in how to do that. Because we know it can be daunting. We know a lot of teachers who really want to support their kids but are not gamers themselves. So yeah, our book kind of steps through what you can do to get set up, and then different ways you can support students from these backgrounds, and also some game recommendations too for different platforms.
Yeah, it's better for us too, Camden. Yeah. we can read the chat as well now, so that's good. We should have gone low tech from the start, Ben, without using that.
It worked beautifully, Matt. Worked absolutely flawless almost. Yes,
that's good to hear. Yeah, thank you, Clark. You did notice. That's good to hear. Yeah, so I think the other thing, there's a lot of really good programs out there. Game Plan is a company that does a lot of work around curriculum. It originally started in Sweden. Jess and I, we're always happy to talk to anyone about this, as researchers, we just want to see it get out there and being used by schools. I'll just throw our email address just for next level in the chat so everyone has it. I'm just aware that people may. We didn't get to that slide. No. That's all right. And that's the I need to edit my.
Yeah, that's not quite it.
No, there we go, Matt. It must be. Must be late on a Tuesday night. If you want to reach out to us, here's our email address.
Yeah,
there you go. Press dash.
Good.
Start nextlevelcollaboration.com.
Yeah, so just to finish, look, I can vouch for Jess and Matt. They're both very approachable and are extremely passionate about this sort of thing. So if there is anything you need help with, please, as I said, reach out. They'll do what they can to help you and help where they can. So now is a little bit of time before I say a final thank you to a little bit of self promotion for DLTV and for also Jess and Matt. For those that might be interested, DigiCon 2024 is coming up in November on the 28th and 29th, Thursday and a Friday, a massive 2-day workshop. conference. Sorry, day one focus is obviously, as it says there, on games and neurodiversity. And the day two focuses on AI, the new Victorian curriculum, and VCE study design. So it's a real focus on the new era of digital technologies curriculum. We are partnering with ACME. So if you head to ACME's website, you can buy tickets. There's plenty of information here for you. And as I said, if you enjoyed what you heard tonight, you can hear a larger version of Matt and Jess at the conference. And knowing Matt, I don't know, but surely there's going to be some Mario Kart happening at the end of day one, isn't there?
We've actually got a workshop where we're bringing we've got a range of collaborative games, and we're talking about the skills together. So that's going to actually be pretty cool. We get to play some different collaborative games together.
Yeah.
And in the keynote, we saved our next level stuff. We thought we'd spread it out then and save the next level stuff really for the address.
Well, that's right. Today's just dipping the toe in the water. It's like giving that little taste test, that nibble, so that everyone comes and joins us at DigiCon. And if you can get your hands on one of those big Switch controllers where we've got 3 players, that sounds amazing. I've never heard of that before.
I reckon that'd be. We'll bring it in.
I reckon that'd be great fun. Look, coming to the end, just a big thank you to Jess and Matt for sharing all their stuff with us tonight. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of it. It was really well attended too, which is nice to see. For all those people in attendance, you'll see in your inbox probably in the next couple of weeks a link so that you can go back and watch this. It will also be put on your individual CEG's websites for you to access through your members login. So yeah, big thank you to Jess and Matt. If we can give a round of applause, whether it's virtual, physical, whatever, to say thank you to them for giving up their time and sharing their knowledge with us.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you. It's just nice to be part of the community.
Thank you for joining us. As I said, next time, I think mid-November roughly will be the Brainery are going to be doing a presentation on classroom robotics, which will be exciting. So thanks for joining us. Keep your eyes open. There's going to be plenty more of these ACCE webinars coming up over the next 12 to 15 months. And I really enjoyed tonight, and the chat's blowing up with lots of people showing their appreciation. Jess and Matt, yes, Camden DigiCon is in Victoria. I don't know where you're from, but you're always welcome to travel. It's a lovely place. And I reckon if you ask nicely, you could almost stay with Matt.
Yeah, I'm in Ballarat, Ben. So it's a little train ride, but Jess is in close by.
Yeah, I didn't want to put that on Jess.
No.
But if they decided to stay with you, Matt, between you and I, we can get them down to DigiCon.
Oh, I think so, yes. Oh, Clark's here. Clark's got a spare couch. There we go. Clark's in Melbourne. That's perfect.
Yeah. And he's probably caught up on his sleep now too. Clark, are you nice and refreshed now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm mostly caught up. I was gone for about a month overseas, and it took me about a week and a half to get acclimatized. And unlike all of you, daylight savings time change did not affect me because I was already messed up anyway. So, it didn't affect me. So no, I got very lucky there, I guess. But yeah, see, I'm not really that close to the city, so sorry.
But who else can we put him with? What about Matt? I know who they can stay with.
Who?
Roland.
Oh, Roland.
Yeah. Yes, of
Everyone
course.
knows Roland here. I know Tina knows Roland.
And Roland's not here to say no. Tina will stay with Roland. You'll stay with
everyone
Roland,
knows
Tina.
Roland. He's in a beautiful part of.
In fact, we'll just give you the address now, right?
Yeah.
There he is. Great presentation, guys. It was good.
Thanks, Tina. That's great. Nice to see you.
Oh, yeah, I'm here somewhere. Hang on.
There you are.
Oh,
in the dark.
It was very dark.
I know. I'm in the kitchen this time.
That's good.
Good to see everybody. Good turnout, Ben and everyone.
It was.
Great.
Tina, I think, these two would go okay over at EdTech SA.
Definitely, we have to talk to the gang at EdTech SA. Yeah,
Fantastic. That'd be
definitely. You can always come to my school if you want.
Would love to.
We might be able to persuade them to come to Queensland in September for the good weather.
Oh, we do like.
Well, you could
next
actually
September
have
we do like Queensland.
Are we gonna bunker with Camden? Is that what the thing was? Or
So yeah, well, if you went to Queensland, you could get Dan, and you could do a trio.
We're actually in Queensland 2 weeks.
November.
For the Fuse Festival, the thing that Dan and I have.
Right.
If
Yeah,
you're
nice.
around, come see us. We'd love to say hello. Yep, Camden. Yep, we're good with kids.
How many kids, Camden? 4. Well done. Busy house.
That's a full
Camden's he's almost got as many kids as I have in my school.
How many is that? 13?
10.
Yeah.
No. 10?
Yeah, you knew that, Tina. We've spoken about this before.
Oh, no, because I'm so in awe of your mural. It's beautiful. So that's why there's 10, or how many characters that you painted?
There's more than 10 because all the staff picked one.